supremacy. I then went on in this paper to say, as with Marcus Garvey, W.E.B. Du Bois, Paul Robeson, Alpheus Hunton, George Crockett, Sinclair Drake, Earl Dickerson, Malcolm X, and many, many others, giants in our history, Dr. King delineated and repeatedly stressed the special relationship between African Americans and the continent of Africa. That special relationship in turn gives us, I think, a special responsibility. What are the implications of that relationship? Does that special relationship then mean that we have a special responsibility to fulfill? I don't want to belabor this point, but I do want to argue that there is an even more special responsibility that we have to fulfill in Southern Africa. In the address that we just heard from Kati, he already enumerated and identified some of the different aspects of that. Let me just go one step further to describe briefly the situation of havoc, ruin, and utter, really, genocide that the South African government and its allies in this country and elsewhere have attempted to do against the neighboring states of South Africa, namely the Republic of Mozambique, Angola, Botswana, Zimbabwe, and Swaziland and Lesotho. Since 1980, South African state violence against its neighboring states has resulted in a minimum, and these figures are the only thing perhaps that I'd ask that you remember from my talk today, a minimum of 1.1 million lives being lost. The current figure we're working with in Mozambique is that the South African War of Destabilization has caused directly the killing of over 100,000 civilians. In Mozambique alone, since 1980, there's an additional 600 to 700,000 lives that have been lost since 1980 because of this South African-backed war of destabilization. Today in Southern Africa, there are more than 8.5 million people who are homeless. There are another 2 million people who every night do not sleep at home, but they go out into the bush away from their own homes to sleep, buried and hidden in the bush because of this war of destabilization waged in Mozambique and in Angola particularly, as Kati has already pointed out. There are today in Southern Africa, in the countries of Angola, Mozambique, Malawi, Zambia, Zimbabwe, over 750,000 orphan children, again the product of this war of destabilization and killing waged by the South African government. Additionally, the South African government's war against the neighboring countries has meant the loss of some approximately $35 billion worth of damage to roads, to hospitals. In Mozambique alone, there have been 1,400 schools that have been destroyed. In Mozambique alone, 400 school teachers have been killed and are missing. In Mozambique alone, there are 200,000 orphan children. This is a war of genocidal proportions that the South African government is waging against the neighboring countries. Let me move on very quickly. I think that Kati has already summarized very, very, very vividly much of the aspects of the war that South Africa wages inside of South Africa. I was asked, however, to talk about one, and I'd like to talk about one aspect of the resistance going on inside of South Africa, because I think it has a particular parallel to our own struggle in the United States. The struggle in South Africa, as Kati has already identified, is an intense and a glorious chapter to resistance throughout the world. It is a struggle that is characterized by all kinds of levels, from the armed struggle all the way through to the cultural struggle that goes on all over the country. It's a struggle in both South Africa and in Namibia that you see in song, you see it in poetry, you see it in theater, you see it in the incredible writing that's coming out of South Africa, the theater that's coming out of South Africa. The struggle is a struggle also being waged in terms of some of the most momentous moments of organized labor that have ever been seen in the history of labor struggles anywhere in the world. And I think that is a particular note that you here in Detroit would particularly appreciate, and that is the chapters of labor resistance that are being added to the world's history of labor struggle that are emerging now in South Africa. So too in Namibia, the same kind of story is being written. However, I want to try to focus on just one particular aspect of what is really in Southern Africa, a kind of culture of struggle, and that is to specifically talk about church struggle in South Africa and in Namibia. Churches are central to our lives in this country. And so too in South Africa and Namibia, churches have been central to the struggle and the resistance going on in the country. Hence it is that though many of us might not know, that within SWAPO, the Southwest African People's Organization Liberation Movement, there is a chaplaincy, there is a pastor within the African National Congress. There's a special unit that works just with churches. There is a pastor and a chaplain within these liberation movements. The South African government is fully aware of the growing role played by those churches that are involved in the liberation struggles in South Africa and Namibia. Hence, it's no accident that one of the leading Catholic priests in South Africa, black priest, Smangaliso Mkhatshwa, was 2 years ago tortured severely and viciously, as have been many priests, pastors, church workers, bishops in South Africa, tortured and detained. The attack 2 years ago on the South African Council of Churches Kotsi House, the headquarters of the South African Council of Churches, the attack on the Southern African Catholic Bishops' Conference, where a firebomb hit that building in the middle of the night. These are deliberate acts by the regime in South Africa to try to stop the kind of role that churches have played, like churches played in our own history here in the United States. I was just reading, and I think many of you have been following this too. I've been so upset seeing two movies recently. One was a movie called Coming to America by Eddie Murphy. It so much upset me that has spurred me on to really do some serious thinking about what we're being presented in the media. And the second movie is this Mississippi Burning, this travesty. Both of these are media lies. They are the exact opposites. You know, Coming to America doesn't begin to present to us the richness of our relationships historically to Africa. It doesn't begin to present to us the kind of wealth that we have available in that connection, in this very panel today. The same thing with Mississippi Burning, it's just the opposite. You know, that whole movie that presents black people as just being non-historical figures, as if the FBI did the whole struggle for civil rights in Mississippi. What a joke. And instead, what you find is this incredible history of struggle that has been waged, and churches played a very important part in that, in our history, as in South Africa. So too, it is no accident that now the regime is resorting even to things like the poisoning of people. Brother Kati didn't mention to you the recent effort by the South African government or its agents to poison Frank Chikane, the man who is the head of the South African Council of Churches. It made particular impact on us from the Mozambique situation because they have used this poison tactic so many times. I remember going in 1978 to visit a refugee camp of Zimbabwean refugees and found there that all these Zimbabwean refugees were bleeding from every orifice, every opening on their body. And it was because the Rhodesian government, which of course was allied with South Africa, had used a rat poison in people's clothing that they'd handed out. Now the South African government has been doing the same kind of poisoning. They poisoned Reverend Frank Chikane. Recently they dropped a poison gas in one of the churches inside of South Africa. Despite everything that I'm saying, the church inside of South Africa today, and I mean specifically the South African Council of Churches, the Southern African Catholic Bishops' Conference, various church persons and individuals. You know many of the big names, the names like Reverend Bishop Desmond Tutu, Reverend Alan Bozak, Reverend Frank Ciccone, but there are countless numbers of members of churches, church workers, trustees, deaconesses who are more and more witnessing and joining in with the struggle going on inside of South Africa today. The hub of the Defiance campaign that is now being launched right now, that Kati mentioned, the hub of that is coming very much from within the church inside of South Africa that realizes more and more it must take up more responsibility as the state continues to try to vamp on the political organizations, to vamp on the trade unions and others, so that the church in South Africa and also the church in Namibia are very involved in providing a very particular kind of an example of how the church can be not a force for suppression and dulling of people's energies and spirits, but the church as a participant in the struggle of people. The situation in Southern Africa calls on us to do specific things. We have a specific historical responsibility. I want to just mention a few and finish. Number one, we have to press in this country and the media in this country to cover and provide the truth of what's happening in Southern Africa. You've got to stay on the press. White press, establishment press, our own black press, all press, to provide the story of what's happening. I would urge you, there's a new television show called South Africa Now. I don't know if it's been here in the Detroit area on Educational Channel. If it's not, get it here. Get it here, fight to keep it here. It's called South Africa Now. It's one of the few press television stories that is making available what's really happening today inside of South Africa. We've got to fight, continue the fight for total and complete mandatory sanctions against the regime of South Africa. We've got to intensify the support that we give to the African National Congress and also to SWAPO, but also to the mass democratic movements inside of South Africa. We've got to help and give more union-to-union support to things like COSATU, the Congress of South African Trade Unions. I mentioned already support to the churches, to the South African Council of Churches. I would also add that we would like to see intensified support and defense of the neighboring countries around South Africa. Countries like Mozambique, countries like Angola. These moments are precious, precious moments for them. We need your support. We need you to confront those who would be involved in, for example, defending UNITA, those who would be involved in defending the crimes that UNITA has committed. We need you to also press those who are involved in supporting, as Kaki has already pointed out, institutions like Renamo, the South African-backed bandits who have done this vicious, horrendous war against the people of Mozambique. Lastly, I think we have a final special responsibility. And it is, I think, summarized in the recent mobilization that we made to prevent the tour of the Commodores to South Africa. As Dr. Aram has stated already, this is a time where we cannot permit normal life and normal culture to go on in an abnormal fascist society and racist state like South Africa. Above all, we have to stop those who go to South Africa and who are benefiting and profiting off of the apartheid system of South Africa, those who come from within our own community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Our next speaker has also been a long-time activist in the solidarity movement with the people of Southern Africa, has traveled to Southern Africa and worked for the American Committee on Africa and the Washington Office on Africa, Lisa Crumes.
Thank you. I'm going to try and follow the lead of Prexy and be as brief as possible. I'd like to thank you all for allowing me to address you this afternoon. I'd like to make one comment to put the comments I'm going to make this afternoon in context. Although I'm supposed to address the question of women in the struggle against apartheid and in the struggle in the United States for, well, the civil rights movement, but the struggle for liberation and self-determination in the United States. And I'd like to say, as far as my comments about South Africa are concerned, although I do focus on what are called charterist organizations, those organizations affiliated with the African National Congress, as well as those organizations inside South Africa, affiliated with the United Democratic Front, as well as what's known as the Mass Democratic Movement. This is, it's not to belittle any of the contributions that other organizations, particularly those organizations affiliated with the Black Consciousness Movement, have made to the struggle in South Africa. And I just wanted to say that at the outset, because I have been in situations where people will stand up at the end and say, well, you just talked about the African National Congress and didn't, consider other things. It's not that it's that other organizations aren't being considered, but for the sake of example and for the sake of the flow of my particular presentation, that's how I'm going to contextualize my comments. The role of women in both South Africa and the United States has been a very important role. And I'd like to divide my presentation by looking at the role that women have played in specific organizations. I'd like to divide it between the role of women in trade unions and the role of women in political and social organizations. To look at the role of women in South Africa in the trade union movement, I'd like to start with a focal point, and that focal point will be the same for both my look at trade unionism as well as political and social activism. That is with the 1954 founding of the Federation of South African Women. In 1954, the Federation of South African Women put together what was called the Women's Charter. And the Women's Charter was comprised of these women's demands to be included in the Freedom Charter. The demands included things such as the right to vote, full employment opportunities, equal rights to men with regard to things such as property and marriage. I feel that the roots of trade unionism took hold in the 1950s, of which today's level of trade union activism is definitely a result. In the 1970s, South Africa saw an increased trade union activity with the Soweto uprisings, which began in 1976, helping to fan the fire. In the aftermath of Soweto and the real presence of labor union activism in South Africa, the government responded by trying to curb the strength of shop floor trade unionism. The government recommended state recognition of African trade unions and the incorporation of these trade unions into the established industrial relations structures. In 1985, we saw the formation of the Congress of South African Trade Unions, which is South Africa's largest trade union federation ever to be brought together in the history of South Africa. COSATU was very important because it recognized the importance of explicitly incorporating women's issues into the trade union movement. For example, COSATU's agenda included the following: a statement that said, COSATU believes that women workers should take first place in our struggle. Women workers suffer the most under the bosses and the system. It should also be noted that the other demands made by COSATU regarding things such as the migrant labor system, the conditions in the mines and conditions for mine workers, as well as those regarding the abolition of the apartheid system, may not have spoken specifically to the plight of women workers, but by application addressed the situation of women as the wives and mothers of those who suffer as a result of these practices. For example, mine workers are often employed by signing into an 11-month contract, which means that for 11 months out of the year, mine workers will be gone, and the family is forced to stay behind. Mine workers are forced to live in single-sex hostels and are forbidden from bringing their families to live anywhere near where they're working. So a lot of the demands that the labor movement has made on the system in South Africa by application applied to the situation of women in that country as well. Kasatu's demands reflected a trend in which the incorporation of women into the industrial workforce resulted in the emergence of women-specific demands from the shop floor, which addressed women's oppression as both workers and as women. Also, what should be noted is that the development of unions for domestic and agricultural workers increased the potential for the empowerment of women in South Africa, who make up the majority of the workers in these sectors of the economy. Despite all of the good news, it's still a problem that women still face a situation where they're largely excluded from the leadership and decision-making positions in South African organizations. Moving on to political and social organizations, I'm going to refer back to the same starting point, that being the Federation of South African Women. The Federation was also committed to building and strengthening the women's section of the National Liberation Movement. On the 9th of August in 1959, what has come to be the commemoration of South African Women's Day, 20,000 women marched to Pretoria to protest the extension of the pass system to women. After, in the years immediately following the '59 March on Pretoria, we witnessed the banning of the liberation movements in the 1960s. Therefore, the attempts to build and strengthen the women's section of the National Liberation Movement was something that took place primarily in exile. The role of women in South Africa is evidenced in both what I'd like to call traditional and non-traditional roles. The traditional roles are linked to the fact that the home, the community, and children are, for all intents and purposes, managed by women, so that when the military and the police attack in the townships, this results in increased female involvement in politics, and this is out of necessity, because as the women see their children, and whether they be male children or female children shot down in the streets, they have the choice of either sitting there and allowing that to happen, or becoming more politicized in their attempt to confront the repression that's happening in the townships. There's also what I term the non-traditional role, which I think is illustrated best with the fact that from 1980 to the present, women's political organizations in South Africa reemerged after the lull we saw in the 1960s, as well as the lull after the Soweto uprisings of 1976. These organizations reemerged in most South African black communities. They focused themselves on projects such as cooperative buying, adult literacy, child care, as well as rent boycotts, campaigns to have the South African troops put out of the township, and overall government repression. In 1987, the United Democratic Front formed what was called the Women's Congress, and this was the joining of 8 regional women's organizations who were affiliated to the United Democratic Front. The Women's Congress sought to bring issues into the UDF, women's issues into the UDF in a more forceful way, as well as to assert and develop women's leadership. This ensured that the women's struggle was an integral part of the political struggle in South Africa. It seems that the role of women is firmly entrenched in the struggle against apartheid because of a very sophisticated national network of regional organizations. These organizations are designed to further the struggle of all black South Africans while ensuring a mechanism for the addressing of issues which are specific not only to women, but also to women who come from particular areas in South Africa. I had, this long thing that I was going to read, and it just makes more sense given the time and the fact that it is important for us to be able to interact, that, you know, I try and keep it as brief as possible. I'd like to say in closing that in addition to the suggestions that have been put forth by my fellow panelists, I'd like to say that those who are interested in providing tangible support to people inside of South Africa, there's an organization called Sisterhood in Support of Sisters in South Africa, which was founded by Gloria Joseph, Janetta Cole, Audre Lorde, and a few other women based in New York. CISA provides monetary support and any other type of support they can for women in the townships in South Africa. And if people are interested, I have an address. They're based in St. Croix because Audre Lorde is presently living in St. Croix, and she does a lot of the coordination for the group. But if people are interested in contributing to the work that CISA does, directly making the links from communities here to communities in South Africa, I'd be more than happy to give the information at the close of the panel. Thank you.
Our final panelist is Marth Norman, who, as Kofi Egbo mentioned earlier, was very active in the civil rights, black liberation struggle in this country as a civil rights worker in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in the South. She's going to talk about that experience.
Good afternoon. I feel a little chagrined to change the subject from such an immediate and important and compelling struggle back to the history of the civil rights movement. I am reminded as I listen to the previous speakers that the theme of struggle and resistance to vicious oppression is a theme that runs throughout the history of people on the African continent and people of African descent, wherever they live in the world, that struggles against the slave trade and slavery, colonialism, neocolonialism, against racist oppression, do unite all of us. It brings to mind a song which I'd like to share with you that we used to sing in the civil rights movement as things got rough and tough, and I'd just like to start with a verse of it if I can. I'm not a great singer. The song goes like this. They say that freedom is a constant struggle. They say that freedom is a constant struggle. They say that freedom is a constant struggle. We've been struggling so long. We must be free. We must be free. Verses go on, constant crying and a constant dying. I, like Mr. Nesbitt, have been disturbed as I've read books, current books about the movement, and seen some of the media treatment and the like. And it seems to me that a lot of what we have available to us today doesn't really leave a good impression of what the movement was all about. It's not remembered accurately, I think, or fully. And so I'm very grateful for forums like this that give those of us who participated an opportunity to present something of what we experienced. Now, as I've thought about these treatments of the civil rights movement, it seems to me that one of the major reasons that they fall short of capturing movement reality is that these treatments overlook or minimize the thing that sustained and carried through movement activities. and the thing that's perhaps the most important legacy the civil rights movement has for us today. That is the reality of the movement, that it was ordinary people, people without access to conventional means of power, through position, through prestige, through wealth, ordinary people from groups who are not usually considered in key political equations: women, students, black people, press people, poor people. People, those kinds of people who came together and created one of the most powerful social political movement this country has seen in this century. And through this movement, they made change. They changed the overall social and political terms governing their daily lives. They purposely affected, guided, and channeled the course of American history. In so doing, they created examples and analyses that had an impact on world history. In the process of becoming and staying involved in serious struggle, these ordinary people did extraordinary things. They made decisions that determined the course and shape of their movement. Their participation was pivotal in keeping the movement alive. They played thoughtful roles, weighing historical options, analyzing their situations, and deciding how best to push history in the way they would have it go. It's in the context of this movement reality that I would like to consider the role of students, saying at the outset that student activism, too, represented a determinative, pivotal, and thoughtful force. I disagree with the notion stated and implied in a lot of recent interpretations that students acted out of a set of qualities particular to youth, which are usually identified as rashness, idealistic, youthful rebelliousness, and the like. But I'd like to take that and stand it on its head and suggest that black students in the 60s did bring certain particularly youthful qualities to the movement. Then, in the mix of political activism, that these youthful characteristics were translated into viable, concrete, and impressive tools for making social change. And I identify these qualities as impatience, boldness, openness, and an acute sense of fairness. I think the impatience of youth was translated into the absolutely accurate assessment that it was a particularly opportune time to make social change. One of the well-used speech statements of our early chairman, Chuck McDew, was to say, we are going to make more changes in the next 5 years than you've seen in the last 50. One of our songs, Eyes on the Prize, from which the series takes its name, had a verse which said, the only thing that we did right, we decided it was time to fight, or was the day we began to fight. And of course, the same sense of immediacy was expressed in the student chant of Freedom Now, which was often used quite purposely in juxtaposition to the slow, melodic verses of We Shall Overcome, which of course end with Someday. I have always wondered what gave us that certainty that it was a moment to act, that at age 16 or 17 or 18, that we knew that if we didn't move, a valuable historical opportunity would be missed. Perhaps it was just the essence of youth growing up in the present, that they are not bound by the visions and the realities of the past, but instead they have a clear hold on the future and can move with future possibilities in mind. The underpinnings of our assessment, I believe, lay in the 50s, in the present in which we came of age. Some of us were children of union activists and political progressives who were still feeling their oats from victories in the 30s and the 40s. All of us witnessed the solidarity of Montgomery's black community in its year-long mid-50s bus boycott. We all watched 9 young people integrate Central High School in Little Rock. In fact, our youth was filled with repeated images of children much younger than ourselves going through mobs in hopes of receiving the educational benefits the same as their white counterparts. In addition to our 50s images of courageous black youth standing down white mobs and of unified community action, events in what we like to call the third world, most especially Africa, gave reality the possibility of fairly abrupt, widespread, perhaps revolutionary, but definitely successful political change. The Mau Mau Rebellion, Nasser keeping control of the Suez Canal, and Nkrumah's use of civil disobedience techniques to win Ghanaian independence were entries in our nightly news broadcast and daily papers. And as the newspapers treated these things in negative or patronizing terms, older people around us told us otherwise. I still remember my parents almost dancing with glee as they broadcast news of the Mau Mau uprising, which was being described by my teachers and on the news things as a kind of unfortunate activity. Whatever our roots were, we took our impatience and quickened the pace and intensity of civil rights struggle. If you look at the difference of the pace of activist events in this country, from Montgomery to the sit-ins, that is from 1955 to 1960, and then look from the sit-ins of 1960 to 1966. In the second half of the 50s, there was a boycott here, a boycott there, some school desegregation activities, some organization around the vote, and a couple of small national demonstrations. But after 1960, when the students began to organize and get into motion, something was happening involving large numbers of people all over the country, all the time, from that moment forth. After the sit-ins, there were freedom rides, voter registration campaigns, citywide demonstrations and boycotts, and a large number of other community efforts. Things were happening so fast in so many places that it was hard to keep track of them. Throughout the course of the movement, students made up the bulk of demonstrators, the majority of those going to jail. Most often, they were the first to act, the first to be arrested, and the adult community followed in youth's footsteps. If you trace the civil rights history of Selma, Alabama, for example, it's the students at Hudson High who began the activist story there in the early 60s, way before the events on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and who remain active throughout the 60s, whatever organization comes and goes. Among the students, I think, there was in this continuous activism a consciousness of the need to keep things going, to keep movement activities expanding and growing. When Diane Nash and the Nashville students decided to continue the freedom rides on to Mississippi after the first set of buses were burned and bombed, Diane said, "If freedom rides had been stopped as a result of violence, I strongly felt that the future of the movement would be cut short. The impression would have been that whenever a movement starts, all you have to do is attack it with massive violence and blacks will stop." She and her fellow students decided that it was worth risking their lives then to keep movement momentum going. I remember in my first direct contact with movement activists in the early 60s that they talked quite consciously about building a mass movement. They say, well, you'd say, well, okay, so what is it we're doing here? And they'd say, oh, we're going to build a mass movement. And that was that. These students also further intensified and quickened the pace of struggle by placing activism full-time on their agendas. They left their schools, their jobs, their campus social lives to become full-time organizers. This decision again reflected their sense of immediacy, that it was time to act, and that time to act was now. They literally and figuratively dropped everything and went to take up places in the Deep South. So this youthful impatience then, which was translated into a sense of immediacy, which was in turn translated into both continuous and full-time activism, through this, students played a major role in building and sustaining the civil rights movement. Secondly, I think students helped raise the level on which the struggle was carried by transforming this youthful boldness into political courage. From the onset, they based their strategies on a willingness to go to jail and a willingness to risk life and limb. You see this in the freedom rides, and you see that in all the demonstrations. Every participant understood when they went out, they would be arrested, they might be physically attacked, and death was not a remote possibility. This is a fairly high level of struggle, and no previous civil rights groups had based its strategies on this assumption of this kind of struggle in the 20th century. And it was meeting the Southern establishment on its own grounds. For the system of racial oppression was sustained essentially by both legal and extra-legal terrorism. Anyone violating segregation laws was by definition subject to arrest and conviction. If not arrested, and then of course they'd meet physical harassment and beating and so forth in jail. If they weren't arrested on this or another trumped-up charge on violating the segregation laws, then of course they might be visited by night riders, by the Ku Klux Klan, or whatever variety of local terrorist organizations existed at the time. I think the students took their boldness another step further by deciding to attack racial segregation at its strongest point, and that was in the rural southern black belt, most especially in Mississippi. And this decision also represented a shift in civil rights strategy, which had been in the past to isolate these hardcore areas and work in the more liberal areas of the South. So that later on in the movement, when Dr. King goes into Selma, Alabama, or he goes into Mississippi, he is in fact following the student lead in terms of direction. And there was some analysis behind this decision. And I'm just going to quickly summarize. I think basically students felt that it was important to include the demands of the most oppressed black citizens within the civil rights movement. And they expected in turn that by including these people and their demands, that the movement itself would be more radicalized and more militant. The third youthful quality I'm suggesting here is openness. And here I'm just looking for something to say is the opposite of dogmatism. And I think this openness in turn led to a kind of creativity and thoughtfulness and respect. To begin with, we had tremendous respect for the communities in which we worked and reflected this in our basic organizing assumptions. We defined ourselves as catalysts, expressing our assessments that all the ingredients existed to make change. All we needed to do was bring people together. We weren't leaders. We didn't have to define direction. We had the slogan, "Let the people decide." I think the political upshot of all this was that the students were linked in protest with people willing to struggle at the same level as the students. That is, they were willing to go for broke, risk their lives, risk their jobs. I think whenever I hear the I've been to the mountaintop speech by Dr. King, I think the power of that speech, and I think when he was giving it, the power of that speech was not that he was just talking about a commitment that he made. If you read the whole context, I think it's very clear. He is talking about a commitment made by everyone. He was talking to a church full of people who were getting ready to make that commitment. By everyone who entered into a civil rights demonstration in the South in those years. They said essentially, we don't care about anything else. Nothing matters at this moment except this struggle. And that is the kind of unity, I think, that was expressed at that time. I want to say that this youthful openness also translated to respect for each other. We listened to each other. Our staff meetings lasted forever because we tried to reach consensus. We tried to move together. And I think that kind of openness made an environment in which creativity was encouraged. We had wide numbers of projects that ranged from creating new vehicles from the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party to the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, which was nicknamed the Black Panther Party. We had freedom schools, freedom theater, Poor People's Corporation, the Mississippi Labor Union, and so on. Whatever you felt you could do at that time. And I repeat, we were 16, 17, 18. We'd say, okay, we're going to make this, and we do it, and we carry it out. I think all of this creativity and respect flowed from a sense of doing something experimental, something where to be successful we had to be open to new ideas and modes of action. And the setting that we were in required that of us, that no matter how great or how small our position was in the civil rights movement, we had to answer major questions about making social change. Just to put it real simply, if you find yourself, as I did at 18 in Mississippi, wondering if you're going to live out the summer, you ask yourself, what am I doing here? Does it make sense? Will it be effective? And even when you think you have an answer, you keep checking because you're putting the most important thing you have on the line, your life. You'll read about other movements at other times and other places. You'll seek to understand the workings of your own society, and you look for theories and strategies to guide us. One of the things I remember most about working for SNCC was these discussions with my co-workers on this subject, on these kinds of subjects. And I think it was from this mix, from our need to think, to analyze, from our interactions with each other and these communities while engaged in hard struggle, that enabled us to move forward, to articulate new positions, to see new visions and new relationships. We came to love Malcolm, along with Dr. King, to construct a viewpoint around Black power, to articulate support for urban uprisings, to oppose the war in Vietnam as racist and imperialist, to become knowledgeable about and identify with African liberation struggles, and to broaden our support to include the struggles of the Palestinians. The last useful quality I've identified here is an acute sense of fairness, which in this political context was translated into a sense of moral outrage. Here, maybe we were touched by concepts from our religious backgrounds, maybe a little bit from Quakers through pacifism. But we had the notion that there is a kind of basic equality among all people, something much greater than the political concept, that all people are created equal, endowed by their, something much more basic and greater than that. And I think this sense of fairness, of equality, was followed by the judgment that something was very much amiss when this fundamental human equality is thwarted by any social political structure of a nation or a set of nations. I think in the end we moved then, not so much out of our concern for specific rights or privileges, or for this issue or for that issue, but because we understood that people were suffering, people were in misery, people were dying because of the social order of the day. We were moved by stories of brutality, of rapes, of beatings, of lynchings, of seeing hungry children whose parents put in long hours of hard labor. We were moved by entering communities without access to the most basic health facilities. It was oppression that horrified us, and it was oppression that we sought to address and to dismantle. It was not being able to justify to ourselves standing still in the face of this kind of suffering, in the face of this kind of terrorism, just because it was not right. It wasn't fair, that made us want to take the necessary risk to seize whatever small historical opportunity existed for change, and to push out its boundaries and to bring those injustices to an end. Because of our sense of fairness, abstract concepts like freedom, like justice, became everyday concrete realities on which we based our struggle. I think we miss a lot of the depth and the height and the essential spirit of the civil rights movement if we think it was a struggle for civil rights, for it was something much greater than that. And when I'm asked what the student contribution to the civil rights movement was, or what the contribution of any group of movement participants was, I always respond, their contribution was that they offered everything they had, their lives, their souls, their hearts, to struggle for freedom, to struggle for justice. They moved out of the deepest human yearnings for the highest human goals. And if you're not certain about this, and one of the things I think that's wrong with something like Eyes on the Prize and a lot of the stuff, that all the music's in the background. All the people are in the background. It's the quote, the presidents and the congressmen that are put in the foreground. But if you have an opportunity and you listen to the songs, if you listen to what's being said in mass meetings, if you read what people who were participants themselves wrote, you will see that they wrote and sang and talked about freedom. Over and over we sang songs with these words. We're fighting for our freedom. We shall not be moved. I'm on my way to freedom land. Will you go to jail for freedom? Will you picket for justice? And of course, many of these songs were church songs and union songs adapted slightly to fit our movement. But we also sang a song, Unchanged, from our own history, something that our slave foremothers and slave forefathers sang, which tell us a lot about the depth and seriousness of this movement. And of course that song went, oh freedom, oh freedom, oh freedom over me. And before I be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Thank you.
And I want to be new too.
can't get over, can't get over you, can't get over. I can't get over you.
89 African World Festival. We'd like to welcome you to our opening ceremony and what will prove to be the best African World Festival ever. Yeah, come on. I can't hear you. Come on, get ready for it. At this time, I'd like to introduce to you our Master of Ceremony for the evening, Mr. Ali Abdullah. Ali Abdullah is a knowledgeable member of the Detroit African culture community. He is a dancer, choreographer, traditional dance historian, tour guide specialist, and many other things to his credit. He is also an innovative and expressive artist who uses African dance as a medium of communicating African culture. Mr. Abdullah speaks the language fluently, adds knowledge of the diplomatic protocol system of traditional African society. He has attended major world festivals in Africa, Europe, and the Middle East, and has received awards for his quality of work from dignitaries all around the world, including the former president of Senegal, Leopold Sedar Senghor. Ali Abdul emerged as one of the foremost authorities in the field of African arts and culture in the United States. In 1981, he returned to the States and settled in Detroit, Michigan, where he founded, organized, and established the Studio of African Dance Philosophy, Inc. That studio performing company incorporated cultural, aesthetic, theatrical, and professional perspectives that gave him a unique place in the field. Clearly, his work in Detroit has been extraordinary, making his company one of the most acclaimed companies in the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, and even you little people, please join me in welcoming Ali Abdullah, our Masters of Ceremony, who will introduce you to our distinguished panel.
Thank you very much. I would like to open this with a prayer. I think we should always acknowledge the Creator before we start anything in this life. And I would like to say, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Rahmanir Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin, Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in, Ihdina siratal mustaqim, siratal ladhina an'amta alayhim, ghayril maghdubi alayhim waladdallin. Ameen. And these praises are thanking the Creator for just having us being here and being conscious of our responsibility in this life. I'm honored to be the Master of Ceremonies to present to you the most dignified city council members, dignitaries, ambassadors, and representatives of ambassadors to this festival. We would first of all like to thank the Honorary Coleman Young, Mayor of the City of Detroit, and we have in his place today, the Mayor was not able to come, and we have in his place Willie Fowler, and he is the Director of Neighborhood City Hall. And we'd like to thank Mr. Fowler for being here today. Mr. Fowler, would you come up and say a few words of encouragement to...
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Mayor of the City of Detroit, the Honorable Coleman A. Young, I bring an official proclamation from the Mayor's office. Briefly, it says, the Mayor's Riverfront Festival Award is presented to the African World Festival in recognition of the exceptional service and valuable contribution made to the spirit of Detroit, alive in the hearts of the people of metropolitan Detroit. On behalf of the citizens of the City of Detroit, Michigan, signed Coleman Alexander Young, Mayor of the City of Detroit. Thank you.
I would just like to say on behalf of the Museum of African American History and all those involved in putting together this 7th successful African World Festival, thank you very much.
Thank you. I would like to continue with greetings from Carolyn Cheeks Kilpatrick, Honorary Chairperson of the African World Festival, 1989, the Michigan House of Representatives. I'd like to just say a few things about the representative. Representative Kilpatrick was first elected to the Michigan House of Representatives in 1978 and re-elected 5 times. Representative Kilpatrick is the first black woman in the history of Michigan statehood to serve on the House Appropriation Committee. The representatives was selected in 1984 by Governor Jay Blanchett to participate in the first of its kind Michigan African Trade Mission and visit several African countries. In 1985, Representative Kilpatrick returned to Nairobi, Kenya, to participate in the United Nations International Women's Conference in 1986. Representative Kilpatrick led an 11-member delegation for the Michigan Department of Agriculture to Nairobi, Kenya in 1987 to participate in Kenya's International Agricultural Show. I would like to now ask Mrs. Kilpatrick to come to the mic.
Thank you very much, my brother. I would like to take this opportunity to officially open and to welcome all of you to the 7th Annual African World Festival. Can we have a hand for the 7th Annual? All right. It is important that we understand and remember that African people all over the world are struggling for freedom and dignity and power forever and ever. That as we celebrate the 7th Annual African World Festival, sponsored by the Museum of African American History, that we not forget Brother Mickey Leland, that we not forget Brother Nelson Mandela, that we not forget African men and women who have given their life that we be free. So let us continue to rejoice and join in the struggle as we celebrate this weekend. African World Festival, a positive, powerful explosion. God bless you, my brothers and sisters. And remember, support the Museum of African American History. Through it, our children and our grandchildren will remember that together we will once again rise as kings and queens. May God be with you.
Thank you very much. And we need this not just for 1 year, once a year, but we need to have this in our hearts every day of our lives. We have to realize that it is a situation that involves African people all over the world, and we should be conscious of the issues that are facing us today as a people. I would like to also bring to the mic the United States Congressman John Conyers, which gives me a pleasure to bring him and to introduce him to.
Good evening, brothers and sisters, to the Honorable Ali Abdullah, to my fellow public servants of the council, the representative of the mayor, Coleman Alexander Young, and to all of the distinguished dignitaries, and you, our brothers and sisters and fellow citizens of Detroit. I come here to celebrate this 7th annual event with a heavy heart, because in a few hours, the plane that I will take will be winging its way to Houston, Texas, where I will represent all of you at the last rites of my late departed brother, Congressman Mickey Leland of Houston, Texas. And we wish to recognize that he is one of those heroes who sometimes was not as well understood as he ought be, because Mickey Leland persuaded the Speaker of the House of Representatives to create a task force on hunger, in which he was appointed the chairman, and he had been responsible for flying or causing to be flown into Ethiopia thousands of tons of food that were going to the starving peoples of that great land. He frequently went over to Ethiopia 4 or 5 times a year. He did not take junkets. He was a beautiful brother. He was a former chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus. Some of you on this platform and in this audience have been to the annual Congressional Black Caucus affairs held every September. So I go remembering my colleague Mickey Leland and remembering the spirit that brings us here. We shall overcome. We shall make this country and nation, indeed the world, a better place for our presence, bringing that great spirit that African peoples and African American peoples can bring. The most current example, of course, is jazz. That music form is now celebrated around the world, and it originated in our churches, in our clubs, in our neighborhoods. And so the great art that is going to be presented to you, the works of culture, all the other artifacts that will be a part of this program for the next several days will make us all very, very proud. There are 2 people I want to single out. One is the director on the African American Museum, who has been there since the beginning with Dr. Charles Wright. He is Mr. Eugene Gilmer, and I wish that he would be accorded a hand for his great work. Where are you, Dr. Gilmer? And the other is a young man who has performed here every year, one of the great percussionists who has studied with Max Roach and Roy Brooks, Sundiata, who will be performing shortly. Where is Sundiata? Thank you very much. Let's enjoy, let's celebrate, let's learn, and let's remember that we are all in the struggle together. Thank you very, very much.
I am grateful to be here to join in this celebration, to recognize that we know today that all people, black and white,